Welcome to Justice Matters. I'm Denise George, Attorney General of the U.S. Virgin Islands. Justice Matters is a program aimed to inform, engage, and empower you with knowledge of Virgin Islands laws that affect our everyday lives and our community. Today's topic is about elders and the law. We are talking about the laws regarding elders or seniors in our community and the laws that protect and empower our senior citizens. This, of course, is important to everyone because if you're not a senior yet, you hopefully will become one and live a long and healthy life. So how do our laws define what is an elder? Under Chapter 34 of the Virgin Islands Code, elder means any person residing in this territory 60 years of age or older. We will have a special guest today to talk about legal issues that seniors or caretakers of seniors ought to know about. She is the Executive Director of Legal Services of the Virgin Islands, Attorney Shelby Gaddy. But before getting to that, let's take a look at Virgin Islands laws referred to as the Elder and Dependent Adult Abuse and Prevention Act. This law is written for the primary purpose of providing legal protections to seniors in our community. For example, under the Elder and Dependent Adult Abuse Prevention Act, certain persons are required by law to report suspected abuse or neglect of an elder or dependent adult, particularly those persons who have assumed some responsibility for the care or custody of an elder or dependent adult, whether or not that person receives compensation. This includes administrators, supervisors, and any licensed staff of a public or private facility that provides care or services for elder or dependent adults, or any elder or dependent adult's custodian, health practitioner, clergy member, all officers and employees of financial institutions who have direct contact with the elder or dependent adult, or who reviews or approves the elder or dependent adult's financial documents or records or transactions in connection with providing financial services. Also includes employees of the Department of Human Services and members of law enforcement. These mandated reporters are required to report their observations or knowledge about any incident that reasonably appears to be physical abuse, abandonment, abduction, isolation, financial abuse, financial exploitation, or neglect, or they must report if they are told by the elder or dependent adult that he or she has experienced behavior constituting abuse, abandonment, abduction, isolation, financial abuse, financial exploitation, or neglect, or that the senior reasonably suspects that such conduct is taking place. The law says that mandated reporters must report the known or suspected instance of abuse by telephone immediately or as soon as reasonably practicable, and by written report send within 2 working days from the date of the reported incident to the Department of Human Services or the local law enforcement agency, specifically the Virgin Islands Police Department. Any person who is not a mandated reporter under this chapter who knows or reasonably suspects that an elder or dependent adult has been the victim of abuse may report the abuse to a local law enforcement agency, again, specifically the Virgin Islands Police Department, or directly to the Department of Human Services. So, what if a person reporting is not sure or doesn't have proof that the abuse or exploitation is happening? Well, under the law, you only need a good faith, reasonable suspicion to report it. and the Department of Human Services or the police department would do the investigation. The law protects the reporter or the person who is doing the reporting and makes it clear that there is no liability against a person who in good faith makes such a report. Specifically, the law says, any person reporting a known or suspected instance of elder or dependent adult abuse does not incur civil or criminal liability as a result of any such report of elder abuse or neglect, unless it can be proven that a false report was made and the person knew that the report was false. There are even criminal laws against the abuse of elders, including criminal abuse or neglect of an elder or dependent adult charge, financial abuse of an elder or dependent adult, or another charge of financial exploitation of an elderly person or dependent adult. Apart from the criminal laws, there are a myriad of legal matters necessary just to transact the affairs of life that might require legal guidance and advice from an attorney, which can be, of course, very expensive. But coming up next, we have attorney Shelby Gaddy, Esquire, who is the Executive Director of Legal Services of the Virgin Islands. This agency has the program that provides legal guidance or representation just for seniors without the expensive legal fees attached. Welcome to Justice Matters, Attorney Gaddy.
Thank you.
What is legal services and what does legal services do as it pertains to the elderly?
Legal Services is an organization that is provides civil legal services to those persons who are typically income eligible. But as it pertains to seniors, we don't use our income guidelines necessarily because seniors are a special class that requires assistance because we also have in our mission statement to assist the most vulnerable people in our community. And as we know, seniors are oftentimes within that category. The civil legal services we provide for seniors can range from anything from a guardianship, protective orders, wills, revocable transfer and death deed, guardianship, powers of attorney, all kinds of things.
We're going to talk about more about all of those services, but I wonder when you talk about the services that are being provided, what is the cost? Legal services are generally extremely expensive and not affordable to most people.
Well, that's what makes Legal Services of the Virgin Islands a special entity because we are the only entity that provides free legal assistance to those persons that I've described in our community who are either unable to afford legal services or they are the vulnerable parts of our population.
Okay, and then that includes the elderly. And when we say the elderly, what qualifies as elderly? What age group?
We don't even call them elderly. We call them seniors, and they are 60 years old and above.
Let's talk about those services in particular. You mentioned guardianship and protective orders. What exactly? Let's talk about guardianship first, because that's usually an issue that I know that's very prevalent with respect to seniors.
I'd like to talk to you about guardianships with respect to powers of attorney. And when we start talking about seniors and as we age and reach a point where we need assistance in handling some of our day-to-day activities and our day-to-day affairs, we typically will advise seniors to designate someone to be the person under a power of attorney. Because while you're competent and you're able to make determinations about people you trust to handle your affairs, it does not remove you from being able to handle your own affairs, but it gives you the access to somebody to do those things for you. Those things will include things like going to the bank for you, going to Social Security on your behalf, or even receiving your Social Security and then going, making sure that they're handling your bills and taking care of things for you. It could mean taking you to the doctor, signing papers to consent to you to be admitted to a hospital or to receive care. It can be a number of things. It can be as limited or as broad as you'd like. So oftentimes what we do with our seniors is we spend time with them alone. They may come to our office and somebody's brought them there, somebody they trust, that they want to name as the person in the power of attorney. We meet with the seniors alone because we want to be sure that they are not unduly influenced or coerced into signing a document that gives someone else power of attorney to go to the bank and remove funds for them and those types of things. But we specifically are very careful in that we don't include real estate unless the senior says specifically that they want their real estate to be handled by someone else. And that is kind of a protective position that we've taken as a policy matter in our organization so that seniors aren't, I'm going to say, duped. So the power of attorney really deals with matters. The way we try to do that is so it deals with matters of their personal affairs, accepting out their real estate or their real property, unless that's something they want to do. And we can do a limited power of attorney for real estate. If you want someone to sign the sale on the sale documents or to rent your property or something like that, we can do those as well.
And for a particular property too. So you don't feel like the senior doesn't feel like you have to grant a power of attorney for all of the properties. They can actually say for one particular function. Let's say if they're selling one particular property. Is that how it works?
And that's correct.
I just have a question though, when regarding that, and you bring in the seniors, there are sometimes when a senior, at least we have a lot of cases, unfortunately, where there is elder abuse, and elders are taken advantage of because they might have an elder who is going through dementia or something where they really can't make those decisions and they're being taken advantage of. What happens if you see at legal services a senior come in and it appears they're not really able to make those decisions?
We try to make sure all of our attorneys are notaries. And before we will do a power of attorney where it has to be notarized, is that we make a determination as to whether or not, of course, we're not clinical, but we make a determination as to whether or not this is what the senior really wants, especially if we suspect that there might be some reason that the person is not completely coherent and competent. So we do some limited amounts of determinations with respect to their competence to make those decisions. And it's because this power of attorney now that they're giving to someone is going to give that person some powers that they otherwise wouldn't have. If we find that the senior truly is unable to make that determination, then we always recommend a guardianship. And again, that becomes something that the court is going to oversee as well. And so we're going to be, that person is a little more protected under a guardianship. But a senior could also make a determination that they want a guardianship for limited purposes here in the Virgin Islands.
Okay, so at that point in time, when they want a guardianship or you seek a guardianship, you're seeking an action for guardianship, a civil one in court.
That is correct.
Okay.
And it goes through the family court.
And is the selection of the guardian, the appropriate guardian, done by the court as well? How is that done?
Well, what happens is typically it's a family member or someone who is related to the person. And it could be a friend or a neighbor. But again, the court goes through a series of inquiries to make sure that this is the best person suited for that responsibility. So for instance, when a guardianship is being processed, once we file the petition, we're required to notify the other family members. And that protects the ward so that if in fact, and the ward being the senior that may need to be taken care of, the notification to the other family members then puts them on notice that maybe this isn't the right person. The family may know something, and it keeps one person from being able to take advantage who, they know when something's happening and the senior is moving to that stage, and they come around and they make themselves useful, and the person that becomes a favorite person that the senior sees. But the other family members may know that that person's intents are not admirable. So the family members then have an opportunity to come into court and object.
Oh, that's good. Okay. So let's get to protective orders and what those are and how do they come into play?
So there have been a number of occasions where we have been contacted, say by the Adult Protective Services Unit, our division within the Department of Human Services. And they have been contacted because a family member or a neighbor or someone has noticed that a senior is being taken advantage of or being abused. So they may come into the situation, but it may very well be that it's not something that rises to the level that would come to your office for criminal action, but it may very well be that the senior simply needs to be protected where that person can no longer come around. And so we would seek a civil protective order. And if the person is related, of course, then it qualifies for a domestic violence order. If the abuse is there that warrants a protective order of that nature, or it could be if the parties are not related, there is still the civil protective order that is in place here in the Virgin Islands, so that parties who are not related also can get the same protections.
So that is what legal services would actually represent the senior with a protective
That's
order.
correct.
Is that how it's done?
That's correct. We would represent the senior in getting what's called a permanent order. Temporary orders are granted for a limited amount of time of 10 days before a hearing on a permanent order could be held by the magistrate division.
And that deals for protection from any kind of abuse. It doesn't have to be domestic violence. It doesn't have to be violence, but just even potential financial fraud or victimization.
Correct.
Let's talk about end of life planning. And I know that you mentioned that as well. What kinds of services do you offer with respect to that?
The services that we offer we call it later in life or end of life. Later in life planning could mean that you have determined that should you be in the hospital and are being sustained on artificial life continuing devices or methods, that you do not want to be maintained in that state, that you may decide that you want to have a do not resuscitate order, or you don't want to be maintained on artificial life support. You can make those decisions, and we would prepare what's called an advance directive. So you're telling your loved ones, you're telling your doctor that you don't want to be kept alive under those circumstances. And you can also designate who makes the decision. And then we also provide services to draft your last will and testament. And we also provide services that will allow you to transfer your property. And of course, in the Virgin Islands, as it is everywhere, the main purpose is to avoid sending your loved ones to probate. Probate is a process that takes a long time, and oftentimes it's costly for the beneficiaries.
What are those aspects then? I know we have the trust, we have the deed of gift. The trust usually involved a lot too, but we have the deeds of gift and the and also the deed, revocable deed upon death. Is that what I'm saying correctly?
Revocable transfer of deed on death.
Transfer deed upon death. Okay, tell us briefly what each of those are and why it is that.
Trust is something that typically is not prepared by legal services because the clientele that we typically will represent do not have the assets that would warrant putting together a trust. But we do provide services to do a deed of gift. And a deed of gift is where one is gifting their property to another, and the transfer becomes effective as soon as it is recorded. Now, some seniors have opted to do a deed of gift and then retain for themselves what's called a life estate, the right to live in that property for as long as they are alive. But it's already transferred to the person who they ultimately want to have their property. Once it's recorded, then it's recorded and the transfer has taken place.
Are there stamp taxes required for filing a deed of gift?
What we do for both the deed of gift and the revocable transfer on death deed is we will prepare an affidavit that exempts you from the stamp tax if in fact the parties are related. It has to be a relationship. It's an intra-family transfer exemption from those stamp taxes. So when the deed of gift on one hand becomes a permanent transfer, unless the person decides to transfer it back, the nice thing that happened here in the Virgin Islands is that the revocable transfer on death deed became a viable instrument, because we found oftentimes seniors are preparing for end of life and they transfer their property to whom they believe is a person who warrants it, because that person has really done a lot to take care of them. So they make sure that they want to leave their property to that individual. Once that transfer is done under a deed of gift, it's done. Permanent. But when the revocable transfer on death deed is used, if the senior changes their mind, they have the right to do so, and it's not a permanent thing. Of course, this instrument has to still be recorded, and it has to be recorded before that senior dies. And it doesn't even transfer until the person dies, but it still has to be recorded before that person dies.
The benefit of that is that they're able to change their minds. So the deed of gift, you can't change your mind. It's already a deed, fine. But you can change your mind with that revocable deed upon death, transfer deed upon death.
Correct.
So when did that come about?
2019. And it was really a wonderful thing to have occurred because we did have some situations where seniors had used the deed of gift in preparing for the future, and they changed their mind. And the only way for them to reverse that action is for the person to whom they transferred to transfer it back to them.
The revocable one, deed upon transfer or transfer upon death deed, that is really a good one for the protections of seniors.
And it is our recommendation when we confer with our clients that we are typically guiding them to that instrument because we know the possibility of them changing their minds.
Tell us about your Medicare legal protection program for seniors.
It's really more of an educational program, an outreach program. We are the Senior Medicare Patrol for the jurisdiction of the Virgin Islands. And we have a project director who goes out into the senior population and also talks to caregivers, because caregivers oftentimes are the ones who are reading the statements, taking the seniors to their appointments, their medical appointments. But as a Medicare recipient, you can come to these sessions and she talks, our director will educate the seniors on how to detect Medicare fraud, how to protect themselves from becoming a victim of fraud with their Medicare, and then how to report it. And once it's reported, the nice thing that happens is that we collect the information and the report is made, but because Medicare is a federally funded program, then the Office of the Inspector General actually does the prosecution when they find the fraud.
Now, I want you to give me an example of how a senior would be able to detect Medicare fraud.
The senior had a prescription for a medical device of some sort, and they obtain that device and they'll see it on their Medicare statement. Now, because it's not a bill, sometimes people don't read those statements. And part of our educational process is to encourage seniors and the caregivers to read those statements, because what will happen is they've ordered a device, and somehow or another, a person who wants to scam them or defraud them will maybe add 2 or 3 or 4 more devices of the same kind onto their statement, and they're getting paid for it by Medicare.
Or get devices that they didn't get.
Or they get devices that they didn't ask for. That's a very common way that seniors are victims of fraud in Medicare. The other way that it happens is you have an appointment with your doctor and you go and see them for a regular visit, but then you see on your statement that you've been charged for x-rays, maybe an MRI or something like that. Now, while it's not your money, it is affecting us as a community as a whole, because the Medicare trust, if it goes down, the monies are not there to benefit other recipients.
So there is a finite amount of money, because my next question was going to be, why is it so important that Medicare fraud is reported, by seniors or persons who are their caretakers?
Well, as we know, Congress determines how much money is funding Medicare every year. And as I age and my peers age, we would like to know that the Medicare is available to us when we're no longer working and can get private insurance. Everybody is affected by a decrease in the trust, especially when it's depleted because of fraud. I have to tell you that OIG has been very successful in prosecuting and getting funds. When you look at the amount of fraud, it's in the billions of Medicare.
I know that it is definitely widespread. And so when you teach these, you're teaching with the Medicare project, you're teaching both the seniors and their caretakers. Am I correct?
We invite all of them to our outreach activities, and we kind of make it fun too, because seniors like the outing. Our Senior Medicare Patrol project director is extremely creative, where she's doing some type of bingo sometimes with them, so that they're having an outing at the senior center. And in the process, she's also teaching about Medicare fraud and how it occurs and how to prevent it. how to detect it, and then how to report it.
How do seniors get information about these activities that you're having?
We contact the places where we know they either live in senior living communities, and we contact the directors of those programs. We also work with Human Services, who obviously has a lot of contact with them. We also have a collaborative program with our project. We work collaboratively, let me just say that, with the senior health insurance programs. They call that the SHIP program, and we're the S&P program, and the two go hand in hand through the ACL, which is the federal program under our federal department under the Human Health Services.
What about persons who just want to get the services? And let's say they're listening to this show and they're interested in getting on your mailing list. Can they just call in and say, hey, look, can you contact me whenever you have something going on? Or can they come in?
Absolutely. You can call Legal Services at 718-2626 in St. Croix or 774-6720 if you're interested in the Senior Medicare Patrol programs, activities. Or you can simply call if you need any of our other legal services.
What do you think is the most important thing that you can say to them right now in this opportunity with respect to their legal rights or their the legal services that you can offer?
Be aware that there are people who don't always mean you the best. And when you have any reason to believe that there is something going on that you don't understand, or that doesn't just seem right, give us a call. We can always at least guide you in the right direction.
What about a person who is observing a situation where they believe that a elder might be taken advantage of?
Call the Adult Protective Services Division. It's part of the Senior Citizens Affairs Division within the Department of Human Services, and Adult Protective Services is one of those departments.
Those are one of the departments that work in conjunction with Legal Services also, am I correct?
They work with us and they work with your office as well.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for the work that you do there. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you for inviting us.
So remember those numbers for Legal Services of the Virgin Islands. That is in St. Croix, 340-718-2626. St. Thomas, 340-774-6720. And then there's a disaster hotline, St. Croix, 340-626-9884, and St. Thomas, 340-643-5784. And thank you for joining us again on this episode of Justice Matters.